6 months ago, Mike Caldwell had been talked into participating in a Red Room event on the quote-unquote dark web. He'd met a guy, Gary, about a year ago, who was knowledgeable on all things computer-related, and Mike was interested in learning all that he could. Mike had just graduated high school, and he hoped that he could take over the social media aspects of his father's clothing company. It was a small, mom-and-pop owned business, but Mike knew that with the right tweaks and an online presence, that he could help grow his father's business and eventually move the whole thing over to being online. Gary was a few years older than Mike. They'd met through an online gaming community, and he seemed to enjoy teaching Mike the ins and outs of the skills he'd need to help his dad. Mike's dad was more insistent that he attend university to get a degree in business. They'd sometimes have disagreements. But Mike was telling his father that his business practices were old school, and that if he could short track to getting his father's presence online, then his father should at least let him try. They'd come to an agreement that Mike could take a year off of school before starting university, and in that time, if he was right and could show his father that he was a hard worker, willing to put in the time and energy that it took, that his father would make an allowance and let him pursue his dreams in a more off-roads type of way. Plenty of people were doing well on the internet, and Mike knew that he would make his father proud. Gary had already taught Mike how to set up an online storefront, and that was successfully taking orders, and he was engaging customers through Instagram and Twitter as well. His father seemed pleased with his progress. One night, Mike and Gary were gaming, and Gary mentioned exploring the darker side of the web. Mike had heard stories about what went on there and really wasn't interested, but Gary told him that he had something really special to show him. He directed Mike through some fun and seemingly harmless pages. Hidden cameras and watching people take control of co-workers' laptops while they were on it to prank them. Nothing like what Mike thought it would be until Gary sent Mike an invite to a Red Room. Neither Gary nor Mike actively participated when the two men were introduced to each other, both blurry-eyed and cold, having been kept in the dark cages. Then they were instructed to fight. Gary had paid the Bitcoin amount for Mike to stay and watch, and then Gary paid to be able to comment. He was cheering, and he'd given the men nicknames. One he called Rooster, and the other he called Dog. It was horrific and violent. But Mike didn't leave right away. He felt stuck there, his eyes glued to his computer screen. He turned down the volume on his headset. The sounds were nearly unbearable, and within a few minutes Mike began to feel ill and backed out. Mike's bedroom was on his parents' second floor. His room faced the street. The light streamed in from the lamp posts. His computer was on the wall facing away from the window. He slid back in his chair, took off his headset, and went to use the bathroom. He felt dirty as he washed his face and brushed his teeth. He walked back into his bedroom feeling ready to go to sleep, but he noticed the bubbles popping up on his screen. It was Gary. Mike ignored him and went to bed. He didn't speak with Gary for a couple of days, and then, when he did, it was because they ended up in a room together in a game. Then once again the chatting came easily, and the Red Room incident started to fall away from Mike's mind. "Hey, Mike," wrote Gary. "Dude, you left the room the other night. You okay, bud?" he asked. "Yeah," Mike replied. "I guess that's just not my thing." Gary typed back, "You know, that's all play acting, right? Like wrestling? Those guys get paid really well. They're okay." Mike didn't know that and was suspicious that Gary was either lying or maybe he actually believed it. "Nah, man. It looked pretty real," Mike replied. "It's supposed to. They get paid the big bucks to make it look real. Listen, trust me. There were no men hurt in the filming of that fight. Okay, replied Mike. He wanted to believe his friend, and he did consider Gary a friend, though they'd never actually met. He had no reason to not believe him or to distrust him. Up until that night, he'd only been helping Mike to help his dad out, so Mike let it go and chose to believe that he was just being too sensitive. Tonight, Gary asked if Mike would want to go watch the, quote, wrestling match again, and Mike decided that he'd give it another go. Nothing strange had happened with Gary since then, and he'd come to believe that it probably was fake. He needed to believe that. So he agreed, but told Gary that if it was too creepy, he was going to leave. And Gary replied that was totally fine. No problem, dude. It's all good, he said into his mic. The two arrived at a red room named Suburbs. And as they waited, several people came into the room, and the chat became very lively. Suddenly, a voice came over the mic and announced that the room would be opening. The announcer gave the price to stay and another to participate. A notice popped up on Mike's screen that read he'd paid in full. Then a man walked into the room that was decorated like a person's living room. The man was probably in his 40s. He was wearing a suit, but you could see a tattoo on his left wrist. The rest probably hidden by the shirt and jacket. And he had an ear pierced with a diamond stud. His hair was slicked back. His face looked as though he'd spent some time in the sun. It was tan, thought Mike. He was neatly shaven, his shoes polished immaculately. Then he bent over and he picked up a small burlap sack and he placed it over his head. There were 2 eyes cut into the sack, and through them you could see this man's dark eyes looking out at you. He tapped the microphone on the mic stand. "Can everyone hear me?" he asked, and the crowd of people began typing onto their screen in cheers. "Welcome to the suburbs," he continued, and it took a second, but not much more, before Mike recognized the man's voice. "My name is Jack Scratch, and I am your host for this evening." Mike tried to click out, but the screen wouldn't close. He was frantically trying to get out of the site when he heard his name. Mike. Mike. "It won't matter, even if you unplug your setup." The crowd was typing so fast that Mike could hardly catch any of what was being said, other than there were many LOLs and "Go, Scratch, go." Mike typed, "What is this? Who are you?" To which the scrolling type began to say almost in unison, "Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch, watch your back." "Mike," began Gary's voice. "Mike, listen. I'm your friend, your buddy. You know who I am." "Gary," typed Mike. Then the chat was scrolling quickly again. Gary, before it went back to Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch. Mike was feeling disoriented. He was confused and agitated, and it was almost as if he were trapped in a dream. When suddenly he saw on his screen his own back. Him, sitting at his computer. The view was from outside his window. He quickly ran over to the window and looked out. He couldn't see anything different than usual. He turned and looked at his screen, and sure enough, there he was, standing at the window. That's when he heard it. The bloody screams of his mother. Screaming for Mike's father to help, screaming for Mike. Then the silence. Before his father yelling for Mike to run. "Get out!" Mike went to the window and tried to open it, but it would not budge. He kicked it, and the glass cut his leg, causing him to bleed profusely. In his terror, the screen caught his eye. The crowd was typing, cheering. "Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch, watch your back. Jack Scratch." Which is when he heard the noise. The scraping of something against the wall in the stairway, scratching at them slowly. And Mike was kicking out the window, kicking it, until finally the scratching was scratching at his bedroom door. Thank you for coming to my channel. If you've enjoyed this story, please don't forget to click the like button. Also, if you're not subscribed, please do that now. And if you'd like to be notified when my content is uploaded, please click that bell. Good night.